spring, think of the expense we go to bring you the best places in Melbourne. This is Darebin Creek, and we've even got a lookout for you, so you can actually, like, you know, you're watching this little YouTube presentation in your little grotty little apartment somewhere with low lights, and it's cold and it's miserable. I'm here in the sun enjoying myself. But what I'm going to talk about is not very pleasant. Now, you know my favourite Prime Minister, the man I think is as good as Billy Hughes. And those of you who don't know who Billy Hughes is, well, that's your problem. You'll need to find out. Do a bit of research. You just don't get everything off the YouTube. Look him up. Prime Minister of Australia during the First World War. Turncoat, traitor. Mr. Morrison makes Billy Hughes look like a nice bloke. As I said before, Mr. Morrison is evil incarnate. And everybody says, Joe, that's taking it too far, isn't it? Well, if you've looked at the parliamentary agenda over the last few days, it's extraordinary, the legislation that's been introduced into Parliament and who that legislation is directed at. As I said the day after the election victory when I did one of these YouTube presentations, is people are going to suffer. And what we are seeing today is Morrison's 21st century Inquisition. And if you don't remember the Spanish Inquisition, I don't think any of us would, because we weren't around in the 16th century. Over 35,000 people were tortured to death during a short period of time when Muslims were thrown out of Spain by the Catholics. But the Inquisition is a byword for cruelty and barbarity. And this Morrison government is going to become a byword for cruelty and barbarity, because the legislation agenda they're proposing not only marginalises and dehumanises and ostracises most of the 30% of Australians in social security benefits, it also criminalises trade unionists. Two pieces of legislation are currently before Parliament. One is about ensuring that people on New Start and youth allowance and disability support pensions and single parents benefits will have to jump through more and more hoops in order to obtain a pittance of a social security benefit. It's actually torture. And if any of you who are watching this video have been victims, what I call settling victims, you'll realise, if the department hones in on you, how miserable your life can become. And now that the enforcement of regulation, not laws, regulations, has been given over to the private sector, to the very people who are there, who have been paid to find you a job or look after your interests, we now have the ridiculous situation where the private sector is making decisions on who receives benefits and who doesn't. If people show a bit of lip or a little bit of resistance to what's happening, before they know it, they're off benefits, and it can take weeks, if not months, to get back on them. Then we've got the so-called Robodebt police. That's another extraordinary thing. And a lot of this stuff is done through regulation. But now, through legislation, they want to introduce compulsory drug testing. In an era where people are talking about the loss of the so-called war on drugs and the human misery and the cost to the community has occurred as a result of this failed war on drugs, when you have a government which is willing to legislate to drug test a specific section of the community, not because they've done anything wrong, but because they are receiving a minuscule benefit because they are unemployed or as students, you can understand that what we are seeing is the creation of a modern 21st century Inquisition that makes Dante's Inferno look like a comedy skit when you think about it, because it's an everyday occurrence. And no wonder we find ourselves in a situation in society where people as a community, and that's a horrible word, I'm using the word community when we're supposedly individuals, whereas community, we are seeming to suffer more and more health issues, mental health issues and physical health issues. And you'd think in a society as rich as ourselves that things would be hunky-dory, as they say. We wouldn't see this increase in suicide, anxiety, psychiatric illness, and the list goes on and on. And it was quite interesting to see that the experts in suicide prevention have come up with a new concept, beyond the health system. That's right, beyond the health system. Because for far too long, during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, revolutionary period which we've been through over the last 4.5 decades, what we have seen is that if you have an issue, it is always an individual's issue. It is an issue for the individual, and we are always looking for individual solutions to community problems. And what these suicide experts have just basically said is there are no individual solutions in the majority of cases to community problems. Problems like debt, loneliness, harassment by Centrelink, harassment at work, these are problems which cannot be resolved at an individual level. We need changes in our community, which this government is not willing to entertain. Then we've got the ridiculous situation, totally ridiculous situation, where 1.4 million people, that's unionists, trade unionists in this country, are being held hostage by one senator, Senator Jackie Lambie, who is unhappy with the behaviour, as many other people are, of a leader in the CFMEU, Mr. Secka. Now, instead of negotiating Mr. Secka and getting the trade union, which is now applying pressure on him to continue to apply that pressure, Senator Jackie Lambie, in her wisdom, says, I'll pass this anti-union legislation, which affects 1.4 million, if this individual doesn't resign. And why do they want to pass this anti-union legislation? Because we live in a country where it's almost, to be a unionist, to be almost synonymous with being a criminal, and I'll go into reasons for that. We live in a country where you can't strike, where you can be fined $42,000 a day for going to a protest meeting, and the list goes on and on. Whereas a trade unionist, especially if you're a member of the CFMEU in the construction industry, you've got less rights than a serial pedophile or a narco lord who's imported $200 million worth of cocaine or heroin or crystal meth. You've got less rights legally. So why have we come to this situation? And we've come to this situation because we have allowed this to occur. We have allowed governments at the state and federal level to divide us on the basis of what are superficial differences. We have allowed us to be consumed by issue-orientated politics, where a particular issue becomes the dominant feature of our lives. We don't look at the whole society as a whole and how it's functioning, how it can change. Just a particular issue. We have been corralled as activists into issue-orientated politics because people no longer believe, let alone hope or desire or have the will for social transformation. Now, I remember in 1971 when I first came to Melbourne as a third-year medical student from Queensland, I was seconded for 8 weeks at the Department of Social and Preventative Medicine at the Alfred Hospital. I mean, the Department of Social and Preventative Medicine, that branch of medicine, understood the major advances in human health are not created through individuals changing behaviour. It's about communities changing behaviour. It's about introducing ideas and concepts and making realities which resolve issues for whole communities and nations. For example, the single most important contribution to human health in the world has not been vaccination, and I support vaccination 100%, has not been antibiotics, has not been a groundbreaking cancer treatment. The single most important issue that's been tackled is sanitation. Every year in the inner city, in all the inner cities in Australia, up to 50% of children will die from cholera and preventable disease because there was no sanitation. And in the 1880s and 1890s, when people understood the significance, the importance of sanitation, governments made it a prerogative to introduce sanitation in the cities. And that almost made the rate of cholera and dysentery no longer a major issue in the community. So we had tens of thousands of children who would have died before the age of 5 continue to live. It's the same today. We have a major psychiatric tsunami washing over us as a people. All you got to do is talk to your neighbours and your friends, or just look at yourself in the mirror and look at the situations you face as an individual. The loneliness many people face, the anxiety you face because you can't pay bills, the anxiety you face because you don't know whether your job's going to be there next week, the anxiety you face because you may have upset somebody in authority and you may lose your job, the anxiety you face because you can't find a job and you've got people ring you every day, wanting their bills paid, the anxiety you face when your partner finds themselves in the same situation and you're more interested, you lose interest in the people around you. The anxiety you face when you go to your general practitioner who says to you, well, it's an individual problem. Here's a pill, or let's do some cognitive behaviour therapy, some CBT, or do a bit of running, or do a bit of this, a bit of that. The reality is, if we want major psychiatric reform, we want to be, as a population, we want to be happier, we need to make major structural changes to society, where the individualisation that's occurred over the last 40 years is replaced by a sense of belonging to a specific community. It's no accident that with grand final season coming up with rugby league in New South Wales and Australian rules basically in Victoria and a few other states in the country, that so many people have become so passionate about what's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 weeks, because there's that sense of belonging to something that's bigger than the self, that sense of belonging to a community that gives you satisfaction, because we are herd animals. We have always been herd animals, and people say it's survival of the fittest. It's never been survival of the fittest. It's been survival of the community which can act collectively together and look after the needs of each and every member of that community which survives. That's what gives the group strength. A community which is divided like we are today, whether it's on race, whether it's on religion, whether it's on sexuality, whether it's on gender, a community that's divided like we are today is a community that is ripe for depression and anxiety and anger and violence. And most violence is internalised. We turn that violence in on ourselves, into our very selves, into our very souls, by overeating. You can see that in my situation, drug taking, and the list goes on and on. You know the score. And as I'm saying, there are no individual solutions to social problems. There was no individual solution to the cholera epidemics in the cities in Australia in the 1880s and the 1890s. Cholera was removed, as I said before, by a mass sanitation program. It's the same today. If we want to get back to a society where our needs to a significant degree are met, we need to roll back the deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation revolution, which has done so much harm to so many. The problem is that most people, like 90%, still believe that somehow deregulation, globalisation, privatisation and corporatisation will improve their lives. The reality is different. With globalisation, we have seen the destruction of local industries. With corporatisation, we've seen the death of small business in this country. Although it employs 5 million people, and it's the biggest employer in the world, small business is dying. You go to any strip shopping centre, any regional area, and trade is dominated by 2 or 3 corporations. Governments do nothing to protect small business interests. Although, paradoxically, small businesses continue to vote ad nauseum for Liberal National Party policies and corporatisation policies. When you come to privatisation, we've now got the ridiculous situation in Melbourne where the Melbourne City Council is going to pass legislation to ensure that parks are not overshadowed by these tall buildings that are going up between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. for 4 bloody hours a day. How pathetic. This was the Garden State. This is Victoria, was the Garden State. Now it's the skyscraper state. But this is just an example of what's happening. And that's why parks like this, Darebin Park, are so important. In the scheme of things, in a city like Melbourne and any other city, open parkland, the ability of people to come here, relax, take in the fresh air, look at the ants that are currently devouring me, look at the wattle that's still blooming, hear the creek possibly down the road, the birds, because it's something that we all need to be able to experience. So what I'm saying is, we have gone down the wrong path. We have been suckered into the globalisation, deregulation, corporatisation, privatisation dream, because we were told at the end of the day we'd be well off, we'd be secure, we'd be rich, we'd be happy. We're not secure. The 90% of Australians are not secure. We're not happy. We're not rich. We may be rich in terms of material goods, the fact that I can get a mobile phone and be photographed for this YouTube presentation, that we've got cars and we've got fancy $2,000 bicycles, and we've got cameras and mobile phones, and we can go on the Google, on the internet and listen to any music you like, and if you've got the money to pay for it. But the reality is, as community, consumer goods are not the answer to the loneliness and the vacuum that we feel, the hole that we feel in our soul as human beings. And to a significant degree, unlike other people, I don't say to you it is an individual problem. I'm not saying to you get a help book, self-help group and you'll be all right, or join a religious group and you'll be all right, or join a football club or a car club. What I'm saying to you is, join the struggle to regain community. Join the struggle to push back privatisation and globalisation and corporatisation and deregulation. Join that struggle to make us human beings, not cyborgs or some type of human slave, so somebody else can enrich themselves at our expense. And if you think they care, they don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care about your family. And if you're waiting for some saviour, there are no saviours. And if you're waiting for some movement, there is no movement. We are the people we've been waiting for. We are the people we've been waiting for. We are the opposition. We need social solutions to social problems, not individual solutions which just enrich people financially, those who give those solutions. We need social solutions to social problems. There are no individual solutions to social problems. Think about cholera, think about the inner city, think about sanitation, think about the 1890s. It's about time we had some mental sanitation in this country and around the world, which puts the individual at the centre of the community. Not the individual replaces community. Next week, who knows where we will be? Maybe in a toilet block. Who knows?